expanding the field of periodical studies. I'm Kathy Malone. I'm really excited to be moderating this session today. I'm a longtime member of RSVP. I'm also currently the editor of our journal, Victorian Periodicals Review. And it's only 10:01, but that hour flies by, as anybody who's been to our digital events before knows. So I'm gonna keep pressing on while those little boxes fill up. Um, a quick word of history, a very recent history. We established VPR's Expanding the Field Prize in 2022 to support the work of undisciplining Victorian studies. So the award is awarded annually for an outstanding essay that diversifies the existing geographic, racial, and ethnic composition of 19th century periodical studies. So a quick plug in the chat for you. Um, we are currently accepting submissions, and I've just put the link in the chat. The deadline is June 15th. We are eager to read your papers, so please consider submitting to the 2026 Expanding the Field Prize. The goal of this award is to spotlight the really important work that's already underway, but it's also meant to be an incentive. We want to encourage researchers to look beyond the traditional boundaries of British periodical studies. So we're really hoping that today's session inspires you. I want to introduce our three fabulous speakers. We're lucky to have with us the first three winners of the prize, who are going to talk to us about how their work expands the field and also how their research has developed since winning the prize. So, and I'm going to put their bios in the chat because they're long and interesting, but we don't have time to say them all today. So let me do that. And you'll also find links to their award-winning articles there. Our first speaker will be Sourav Chatterjee, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Transnational Asian Studies at Rice University. He was our very first ever winner of the Expanding the Field Prize in 2022. Tarini Bhamburkar is a research affiliate in the Department of English at the University of Bristol. She won the award in 2023. And our third speaker is our most recent winner of the prize. Nilkantha Pal is a PhD candidate in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences at the Indian Institute of Science Education and Research, Mohali. So please join me in welcoming these three exciting speakers. And you have their bios in the chat. Each of these speakers will have 7 minutes to tell us about their work, which is surely not enough time, but I'm going to impose a standard. So if you go over, I'll just turn my mic on and zhuzh you along. But at that point, we'd like to open it up for what we hope will be a really lively discussion. So we hope you'll have comments and questions, but if you would, please just save them for the Q&A. And so, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Sourav.
Thank you, Kathy, for introducing me. Thank you, Alison, and thank you, Preeti, for organizing and for inviting me here. This is great. So I'll keep it short. I'll tell you a bit about my involvement with the periodical studies. The second is with the VPR outreach, and the third is the future. As you know, you do not know this, I did my PhD in a South Asian Studies department, so I was struggling with finding the proper audience for my work. So it was only in the 2022 at the NIFSA conference, which is the Northeast Victorian Studies Conference at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, that the great Pamela Gilbert said, why don't you send this hodgepodge paper of yours on Boshantok, this Bengali punch, to VPR, RSVP? I said, I don't know who these people are. It's like, why would they even read me? They said, no, they're expanding the field. You should send this out. So I sent it out. I had no clue as to what I was doing because that time I was working on my 1874, the only extant Bengali Punch magazine. So I sent it out, and Catherine Malone gave me insane feedback on it. Preeti Joshi was already on my dissertation committee. So thanks to her, she told me tons of stuff about this. But eventually it came out. I was very happy to win the prize because I never won anything since I was 5 years old. So, I mean, academically, so I was like exalted. So this was great. And so, but then I think I started seeing the direction of my broader book project. So I started thinking about my project being at the intersections of British imperialism, periodical studies, and multimodal studies. because like when we do PhDs, like we are going every single way, like we want to absorb everything. But then I had to shorten it down. I said, okay, fine, I can work on periodical studies in South Asia. So that became the broader project which I'm working on now. It's taking some time, but I currently submitted another article to the Edinburgh Journal of Radical Press, which was it's about the Prince of Wales's visit to Calcutta, the Christmas Prince, so-called. So it's about that satire that was created in 1875, 1876. So now I'm thinking about like how like that Prince of Wales tour in India was captured in periodicals. So that is something very nice. Um, but the second part is that something very strange happened in March. I told Preeti about this already. In March, the three descendants, so the three grandchildren of the editor of Boshantok, the article which I wrote about in VPR, they reached out to me very strangely out of nowhere. So they said they were working on the family genealogy and they wanted to know more about their great grandfather, who is the editor of Boshantok, Gyendrant Dotto. And they were Googling Boshantok, and this VPR article like popped up, and they saw my name and they reached out, they emailed me. I said, I have no clue. I don't know how I can help you. It's like, no, I think because you know everything about my great grandfather, so why don't we meet on Zoom? So I met them on Zoom. So they said, like, yeah, we are arranging our family genealogy, which goes back to some 1760 or something like that. So their family sold Calcutta to Hope Jobs or something like that. It's like, wow, this is insane. So they still live in that same household where Boshantok was edited in the Hatkola family. So they gave me some tidbits about some nice family jokes about the periodicals, which is not published anywhere. So I actually like put this in the article which I wrote. And I told Preeti that, wow, can you believe this? That people are reading VPR. They showed me the printout copy of the VPR, the article. I say, wow, did you read this? I'm like, yeah, it's kind of dense, but we read this. Don't worry, we'll finish this. It's kind of long, but we'll finish this. We love the illustrations. I say, yeah, do you have any more information regarding your great grandfather? I say, yeah, I'll send you whatever I have. So they sent me some family genealogical charts, etc., which is great. But I think like this kind of they circulated the paper throughout their WhatsApp chat group. So I think this has created a different kind of methodology, given that this kind of WhatsApp university already exists. So archival lottery, yes, that is true. So I think this has introduced a different kind of methodology altogether. That VPR has created this transnational labor of unknown strangers who are reading VPR and saying like, okay, let's do something about this. So that is something strange that happened recently. But I'm very glad that this happened. Okay. The third part is whenever I tell people that I work on periodical studies at Rice, they keep asking me what I do, like how can we expand this eventually in South Asia, because I really never wanted to write about the big dons in South Asia. And like I'm not interested in writing about Tagore or Bunkim or Rushdie or Ghosh because like it has been exhausted. And again, I work on periodicals. I'm interested in literary criticism, in poetics and theory, but I work on periodicals. So there are two things I want to say. That first is that I can't still access some of the documents which are there out there, which I know have been cited, mostly periodicals, because I can't find them on archive.org. They cannot be accessed through Hati Trust. They cannot be accessed through any of the websites that I have access to. I have reached out to my friends who do go to national libraries. They do go to state libraries, but they have been unable to track them down. So I think there is some kind of a forged citation problem that is taking place. It's a big problem of the nested citation. Like he said this, she said this, and then this goes on. So I'm still struggling with that. And this is mostly an institutional question because it has to involve issues of acquiring, archiving, digitizing periodicals, and which needs to be text searchable. I would love a text searchable PDF, mostly in Bangla, because every time I lose a citation, I have to like plow through that 800 pages, which I hate. So I would love to do that text searchable PDF because I struggle with that a lot. And this small PPT that I made to tell people that this is what I do at RSVP, so I can share it here. Okay, where is my PPT? just a minute. Okay. Screen document. Just a minute. Let me share the PowerPoint here. Okay. Okay, the PowerPoint. Okay, got the PowerPoint. I'm sorry. Okay. Zoom. Okay. Share Microsoft. Okay. Okay. Can you see this PowerPoint? This is like just like a one-page PowerPoint that I have.
Yes, we can
So
see it.
every time people ask me what we do at RSVP and what is the future of South Asian periodical studies, because we simply do not know how to approach periodicals in South Asia, this is what I tell them, that I mostly understand periodicals as medium and not as historical documents, which has been historically understood. There's a famine. Look at this beautiful cartoon, completely decontextualized everything. So I'm not blaming historians here, but historians have to be blamed. The last generation, not my generation, because they are my friends. So anyway, too bad. So I'm more interested in periodicity, materiality, typography, illustrations. I'm saying this here because I have come across some collected editions of the Bodhini Potrika, some of the local like magazines. So they have been published as a book format, and only the contents and the columns have been published as a book format. It's as if like we do not care about the medium at all. Just give us the content of it. So I think that is some kind of a sacrilege which I'm trying to address here. That why have you just simply extracted the columns out of the periodicals? Like, where is the typography? Like, where are the illustrations of it? So, and these collected volumes get published in the at the book fair at the International Kolkata International Book Fair every year. So anyway, so that is one thing I wanted to address here, that once we start looking at typography, materiality, periodicity, it will open up the realm of labor and media ecology. We can start looking at the producers, consumers, people who came together to put the periodicals. Okay, the second is the methods. This is an important question. Like here, I think about the methods of interpretation, like how do we read image text? How do we understand the medium of periodicals as a multimodal object? Here I'm asking about the ways, the recommended ways of reading, viewing periodicals as like through skimming, parachuting, like Preeti has written about this, command Fing, glossing, etc., etc. The third is the citational practice. Who are we citing, like between local and global, vis-a-vis cultural history, social history, and media history? Because I have seen people write about periodicals in South Asia only by citing Foucault and Jacques Derrida and Hegel and Heidegger, which again I feel offended by, because then I believe it's a sacrilege that is taking place here. The fourth is how to think about periodical studies as a trans-epistemic field, as what Ernst and Schneider talked about in the Periodical Studies Now volume. The fifth is thinking about theory, people who are interested in doing theory of empire, nationalism, race, class, gender, etc. So they have to look for proper ways to do theory here. And the sixth one is the methodology, that VPR, I think, has already created this kind of methodology, that what I call I know someone who knows someone who knows someone, and they will have like the third volume at their home, and then I can reach out to them because they know, okay, they have read my article here at VPR. So so these are the ways we can think about expanding at least periodical studies in South Asia. Yeah, Katie, do I have more time or should I end? Because I don't think I have much to say about this.
I started your time at the end of your anecdote about finding the descendants of
Okay.
Bashantak. So you have about a minute if you want.
All right. Okay. Okay. So this is what I wanted to share. I can talk more about this like during the Q&A sessions, but yeah, so strange things are happening around the VPR. But I'm very happy to be a part of this. Thank you. Okay.
Tarini.
So I've also sort of tried to address my article first, and then where I see the field going next, and also where my own research has gone after the article. So I've written it down, so I'm not going to be as nice and flowy as Sourav was, but I'll try and read it as flowingly as possible. So my article studied how the prize-winning article studied how two newspapers called the Women's Penny Paper and the Women's Signal articulated a cross-racial vision of feminism by integrating profiles of Indian feminist activists The penny paper had begun publication in 1888, for context. I had for long been interested in unstudied or unexplored archives, but for this particular essay, what I did was feel around a familiar archive to see if it could be expanded from within. I had read some of Rosemary Van Arsdale's pioneering work on the Women's Signal and also a lot of other secondary scholarly work on women's penny paper, but never an integrated study of the two newspapers because I think they're quite like connected, even though they had different names, different editors. Like the Signal was derivative of the penny paper. So they had outright feminist interests and had dedicated their columns wholeheartedly to the women's cause. After a brief survey, I found myself asking questions about the incorporation of Indian women because of their heralded claim that they involved every woman on the planet in their periodical, Englishwoman and Foreigner. As much as I was interested in newer objects of study, I believed that there was also some work to be done to expand within the archive. I found front page English language interviews with two Indian women in these periodicals, which in itself astonished me, considering the periodicals often also used condescending tones to talk about Indian women as their poor Indian sisters in other articles and across the entire 11-year run. Then I asked how were the Indian women depicted in these interviews and did they have any agency in how they were represented by the British journalists or editors? A close reading revealed the dialectic between the white British journalists' positioning of the interviewees and the subject's own self-fashioning, which they hold on to firmly, molding their own identities as modern, progressive Indian women on the front pages of a British feminist newspaper. Coming slightly back to this interest that I talked about in unexplored archives, this essay laid the foundation for newer research to follow that requires me to step into new, under-researched, and frankly daunting archives because of the translation work involved and the sort of torn or damaged issues that I'm now having to deal with in my new research. I had opened up a known archive to expand from within, but I had wider interests in Indian women's own periodical press from this period of high imperialism. A suggestion to look at non-white women's periodicals was also iterated in the feedback I got from the lovely judges for the VPR Expanding the Field Prize, who suggested that I call out the concurrent denigration of mainstream Indian culture in the supremacy assigned to Christianity or westernization in the penny paper and Signal, especially in the interview profiles. I have only recently begun to work on Marathi feminist periodicals from the late 19th century, Bombay, Marathi being a language that is spoken in Western India, with the crucial help offered by a current fellowship. Both the interviewees from the penny paper and Signal were Marathi women, and Marathi print culture from this period offers abundant sources for learning about regional feminine negotiation of social reform, women's identities as colonial subjects, and how they used periodicals to conceptualize their relationship with British women. To talk about where I see periodical studies going and where I see it venturing, I wanted to sort of say something positive that I think it has made quite a few strides in the last few years specifically. And I can offer an example from my own experiences about this because in 2022, I had for the first time applied for a current fellowship to work on the very same Marathi periodical that I'm now working on with the current fellowship. But at that time, it was believed that those periodicals fell slightly out of the scope. Like in the feedback that I got, it was said that maybe it's slightly out of scope of the study of Victorian periodicals. But the renaissance of interest in widening, expanding, and undisciplining the Victorian that has bloomed in the years after that, I believe, is already a testament to the new waves that have been made in not just Victorian studies, but also within periodical studies within our lovely community. And I've kind of seen it all blossom, especially in the last 2 and 3 years. An exciting new Edinburgh companion, edited by Andrew Hobbs, who's here today, and Kari's a contributor, and I'm sure there are other contributors here as well that I'm not aware of, maybe attending. An Edinburgh companion to the regional magazine is in the works, which focuses on lots of different like county magazines, provincial newspapers, and lots of non-Anglophone titles from different parts of the British Empire, and hence which were equally a part of the British literary marketplace. And the fact that this is all happening, I think, is it gives me a lot of hope. It's a lovely new direction that we've moved in. Another thing I wanted to address quickly before I end my talk was on the idea of studying periodicals as whole composite objects in their own right, or something like Sourav talked about as well, looking at them as medium and not just as secondary sources, historical documents to learn from. As much as there is a temptation to search for history within these periodicals, thus rendering them as secondary sources that tell you more about the history of that time, I think it is really interesting to see them as vehicles for this history and how they wrote the history that we now know rather than simply record it. In my upcoming project on British and Indian women's trans-imperial feminist periodical press from 1890s going up to like 1910, just before the First World War, when things sort of change a little bit, where I study both English and Marathi magazines from Britain and India in a comparative sort of way, I position them as artifacts, as vehicles for the women's movement. And what I will do is make a case for why the women's movement needed these periodicals, that they weren't there just to record what was going on, but actually were actually building this movement and sort of shaping and bolstering it, helping it move on, building a discourse, and taking this dialogue to sections of society where it wouldn't really have gone otherwise without these periodicals. And I've also occasionally faced certain challenges in the archive, like especially because now I'm working in a really underexplored archive, such as, damaged pieces, archival gaps. And I feel like this is a question that a lot of archivists probably face, and it would be lovely to talk about how to address the gaps in these archives that are caused by just the tenuousness of the preservation of pages, papers, the conditions that the archive is in, because of could be something as basic as the temperature of the place it is in, or the sort of, means and methods in place to preserve these really old documents. So I'd be happy to take questions, but also just to open up the discussion later to how we go about doing that. Yeah, that was my talk. I hope I kept the time.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll turn it over to our next speaker, Nilkantha.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. So, briefly speaking, the article that I submitted for the Expanding the Field Prize actually the research started from my master's day. It started as my master's dissertation project, and later I developed it in my PhD dissertation, which is actually still going on. So, in short, I come from a history background, unlike many of the people in the periodical studies who are mostly for English or cultural studies background. So, as a historian, the first problem we face with a periodical is like my previous two discussions have taught. Usually, we take a periodical as a historical document rather than looking at it as a separate object or it has its own autonomy. So, when I started my own research work, that actually started wondering me. And usually, my work was on a children's periodical in a particular province in British India, that is the Bengal, the eastern part of the British Indian Empire. And there has been a lot of works in literature from literary studies background, on children's literature of Bengal. But most of them I found out that they usually don't talk about the periodical as such, or they just club it with the other kinds of genres like the novels or any kind of published works. That one, but number one. And number two, when I thought of the periodicals, some of the very big names in our history of Bengali children's literature, I found out that most of the periodicals, they didn't last long. Some of them lasted maybe 10 years or maybe 13 years. So from there to onwards, the next question came to my mind: why? What was the reason of their failure despite being so much popular, quote unquote popular? So what I proposed in my article, that children's periodical from a particular point of time in the late 19th century, it becomes a veritable print form in Bengali children's literature. And but at the same time, I also looked at how its popularity was connected with its material culture, its production, its circulation, its consumption, and also how it is related with how the child is imagined in a colonial society. And because all these factors were constantly changing in a colonial period, the material culture of print culture, or the ideas behind a child, what can be a child for a colonized nation, because all these ideas were constantly changing in a colonial society, the periodical formats also started to change, and that actually I thought it can explain the ups and downs in the fortune of the periodicals. So that was very quickly about my article. So actually, I first got to know about this prize from Sourav's article. I saw his article on Twitter, and then I got to know about this prize. So then there has been some recent works from history background on periodicals in Bengal. One of my professor back in my university, she did it. So from that point of view, I also thought like, okay, she looked into the adults periodical, I will say, the literary periodicals, where the nuances of literature, what is obscenity, what is literariness, all this discussed. I thought of let's look into the children's periodical as well. Uh, from that onwards, I started my research, and I'll say still it's going on. I'm currently in the final year of my PhD, writing the dissertation, and a long time has gone after the article was awarded the prize, and I got some of the reviews also from my supervisor, from my friends. So I think I can say two of them can be a really thought-provoking for me, and I think for larger periodical studies from a South Asian context. Number one, the influence of the Victorian print culture as such on on these periodicals. The periodicals I mostly looked into, you can put them into what can be called quote unquote high literature, but at least the influence of the Victorian print culture, how the editors, the writers, they were envisioning of having a periodical business or a periodical just like back in England, how they could make a periodical a marketable commodity for colonized people. There are certainly, obviously, there are many challenges. It was a colonized world, the literacy rate was very low, still the influence was there. And secondly, uh, when I have to look into the ups and downs of this periodical business, particularly I'm from a history background, the material culture, and if we can also dig into more deeper into the materiality of the periodicals. By materiality, I can specifically say about the printing pages, the page for printing. Now, if we think of a late 19th century India, there was not much indigenous paper industry. So from India, the Britishers, they used to take the raw materials, they made all the papers back in England, and those things were again transported back to India. And out of that supply, the periodicals or any kind of printed materials, the books, those are published. So this whole chain of paper making behind paper, not only paper making, paper supply behind a periodical production, and how the changes in all these nodes, like the changes in raw material collection point or any changes happening in the supply line, how that is also impacting the price or the presentation of a periodical. Like for instance, when the First World War started, there was a stoppage of printed paper, import of export of printed paper from Britain to England. So the editors, they started to find out other kind of options. So and from a history student's point of view, I find out those things are also very interesting to dig more deeper into the hardcore materiality of periodical publication business. And also regarding I to take those 2 points as I'm currently working on those 2 points on my thesis also. And regarding the challenges and how to overcome the challenges in periodical studies, one point I can say that we can also read the periodical archive in conjunction with other kinds of archives also, from a very quote unquote historian's point of view, like the archives that we get from the state archives, what is known as how the colonial state, they have to take note of each and every publications and how they have to record them. The other kind of archive can be the personal accounts, I think. The personal accounts of these editors. In South Asia, there is a huge problem of not getting the private papers or the business papers of these business houses. So I thought like one possible way out can be the personal accounts of the editors or those who contributed to these periodicals. Yeah, so yeah, that is the whole point I can say. Yeah, so that's all pretty much of it. Thanks.
Thank you, Nilkantha. So, you guys, you kept a perfect time. I thank you very much. We have a lovely half hour for discussion. Look at all that applause. So if you have questions, please raise your hand, give a shout out, put them in the chat, and I'll try to get through those and make sure everybody gets their opportunity. Would anybody like to begin? Michael, yeah, please.
Sure, I'll start. I had a question for Sourav. I was wondering if you might expand a little bit on the idea about that periodicals are a medium, not an historical document. I'm speaking as a historian, so that got my hackles up. Not hackles, but just got my interest.
Sure,
So
sure.
if you could expand on that a little bit, and what that means for the idea of, for instance, content analysis. Thank you.
Sure. Sure. Thank you. Thank you for the question. Yeah, it's a good question because when we think about medium, it's like medium would have their own properties. Like medium would have their own like ways of analysis. It's, for example, I work on like different kinds of mediums within periodicals. So if I'm looking at an advertisement in periodicals, so that would be a medium within a medium. If I'm looking at a cartoon or any kind of image text, which would have some kind of printed image text, so that would be automatically a meta medium. So that is the way I have used medium. And again, like, sure, a cartoon within a periodical is a content, sure. And there we start thinking about poetics, like what are the ways we can make sense of this cartoon inside a periodical. So I'll give you an example. I have written about like the cartoons that were published in the 1917 in the Modern Review periodicals. Now, the funny part is that the cartoons are all illustrated by Govardhan Tagore, who was the nephew of Rabindranath Tagore. Anyway, so the cartoons are published, suppose, in volume 13, issue 4. Now, if you read that issue, you would think that, okay, it's a standalone cartoon. But that cartoon has been inspired by a column that was published in volume 7, issue 2. So now this cartoon is actually coming after, so it succeeds that column. Somehow things got delayed, like he got busy, blah blah blah. Now this cartoon has been decontextualized year after year in the writings of periodical studies, etc. That okay, if you want to study the cartoons of Govardhan Tagore, look at this cartoon. Now meaning has been lost because nobody actually knew that it's coming from there. So that is the way I was using medium, that like if you have to read a content inside or within a periodical, then we have to take into account the broader interconnecting medium, the poetics of the page, that it's coming from here, it's coming from later on. So that is the way I use medium. Medium is purely like thinking about print culture, and there are like paratextual, paracontextual things which starts affecting the content itself. I'll give you another example. PCL, Profullo Chomdro Lahiri, etc. PCL in 1930s during the Second World War, just before the Second World War. He was illustrating cartoons and he was also illustrating commercial advertisements in Amrita Putrika. And he was also writing columns in a newspaper. So this is a newspaper. Strangely, the thing is that the cartoons and the advertisements were talking to each other on one single page. They were complementary. Now, again, like this has been completely decontextualized for people who have written a history of advertisements in newspapers. So that is the way I was using Medium as a broader network of understanding image text within periodicals itself. So, but is that making sense?
It is. I think it's just different words, perhaps. I might have used intertextuality, but I could not agree more that cartoons so often are plucked out of these, plucked out and used without proper context, without acknowledgement that they, for instance, just in the case of Punch and Fun and others, there's always an accompanying poem, right? Which places
Exactly.
people never talk about the poem, right? And that even within the same issue, there could be commentary and jokes that actually cut across the grain of that cartoon.
Right.
So yes, that I cannot agree more that too often people just parachute in, pluck the big cut from these comic periodicals, and then look at them in a complete vacuum. So yes, I'm very much in agreement with you. I think we're just using different words.
Exactly. Thank you. Thank you so much.
There's a question in the chat from Jesse Cordes-Sullivan based on this elaboration by Sourav and how Tarini discussed similar theories of the periodical as a medium. I wondered if she, Tarini, might elaborate on some of the medium-specific features that distinguish Marathi periodicals. This work sounds fascinating. Would you take it away?
Sorry, started speaking on mute. So I'm just trying to think of medium-specific things. And there are a few cartoons in my periodicals as well, but I'll get to that in a moment because I have the way I see cartoons in my periodicals is a bit differently. But so I think one of the things that distinguishes these periodicals, I think, is that they engage in cultural conversations about gender. So it's not just the same sort of discussion that's going on, say, in the UK about the new woman that is then directly transferred to these regional periodicals, but the discussions are more, sort of rooted in the regional culture of that particular place, what issues were at the heart of the women's movement in India, which was, mostly like female education, yes, but also child marriage, abolishing child marriage, widow remarriage, being okay with widow remarriage. So these issues come up a lot in the magazine. I think that in itself distinguishes them as Marathi periodicals, specifically that they were regional, and their regionality was crucial because of that, because they sort of, discuss things that the women who were reading them then felt like, okay, I can relate to this or understand this. Then there were often essay competitions, but the essay competitions are usually in English, which I find so interesting. Even if it was a Marathi periodical, the essay competitions would be in English, and the topics would be really interesting. They would be, about social reform, about education, and about what women can do to improve the state of education in society, like really heavyweight topics, but always in English, and there would be prize money competitions. So it was almost like encouraging regional women to learn English, to try writing English, and then publishing those in a Marathi magazine. So there's, I'm trying to like figure out how to understand this regional interest in English, even though it was a regional magazine aimed at women who couldn't probably not read English or were still learning it. And then there were often lots of geographically specific puzzles. So they would be about the regions within the Bombay presidency. And I think there were a lot of articles on science. And I think it was a way of getting women to think laterally, but also by focusing on the Bombay presidency and regions around the city of Bombay. So making it familiar, but at the same time introducing them to unfamiliar things, while also keeping the conversation cultural, if it makes sense. So I think the editors were trying to straddle lots of things, introducing new radical ideas to women while also not scaring them off by bringing in lots of new features from like global magazines and newspapers in, if that's making any sense.
The
Hi, thank you so much. This is a really terrific event to hear all three of you speak, and I'm certainly seeing themes. The question, and maybe I don't really know, sorry, let me lower my hand. The question, and I don't know if it's a question or a comment. So, the prize is called Expanding the Field. And what I'm really struck by is that all three of you are, of course, geographically expanding the field. And the fact that all three of you are writing about India sort of makes sense as Britain's largest empire in the 19th century. So when we expand out of Britain, it's India. And, hopefully, as Tarini said, hopefully there'll be other places, other parts of the empire that can be part of this expansion. But I'm also really struck by the fact that all three of you, all three of you talked about this very specifically. The expansion is not only a geographic, but also of genre or content, right? I mean, for a variety of reasons, Victorian studies, VS, I don't mean the journal, but Victorian studies, notwithstanding the journal's origins as an interdisciplinary journal, has been obsessed with literature. I mean, it can't get away from literary texts or poetry. And I think periodical studies has been similar, less so, but, the content that Michael spoke about often tends to be, even when it's by historians, by the way, often tends to be on literature or poetry. So Michael mentioned, there's the poems with it. Well, what struck me about the three of you is you're not talking about literature. You're not talking about literary texts. Sourav, you're talking about cartoons. Tarini, you mentioned ads and various different, the cartoons. And Nilkantha, you spoke about, children's literature, but thinking about it in terms of both the materiality, the paper. Oh my God, the paper, or the technologies of making print, or the images rather. So I guess I'd love, and all three of you, central to that is thinking about materiality, right? The materiality of. So I actually want to ask about Saurav's question at the end, which is an archival one, right? In the face of so much of this archival material, the difficulty, as Tarini said, of getting to it in physically, how does one do that kind of material work other than thinking about, how are things in columns and like, periodical study stuff. So I don't know that this is a question, but it's for me the biggest challenge. We move to materiality and not just let me do a literary analysis or poetic analysis, but we often don't have the actual work. What we have is scans. So big question, all three of you. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Nilkantha, actually, you didn't. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, can you please repeat the last part? There were some glitches, technical glitches on my part.
Sorry, the last part was just the focus and materiality. What happens to the focus and materiality that all three of you talked about so beautifully when the actual material text might be lost because it's not been deposited, as you spoke about, or torn, as Tarini talks about, or Sourav spoke about, simply can't be found, or the National Archive in India doesn't respond to 100 emails one sends, or things like that.
Yeah, that's, I think, the trickiness of periodical studies. I have also gone to some unexplored archives, tried to find out some unexplored periodical archives in India, outside India, and that was actually a problem. the material culture of their production, I will also say it also impact the materiality of the periodical, how it's getting preserved in an archive. And secondly, the interesting thing is regarding the materiality, the preservation point. As we all know, in South Asia, when a periodical is preserved, they usually tear off the advertisement pages at the front and just uh, keep it in a hard volume, the main contents. So when we just go into a volume of a periodical of just 1 year or a monthly volume, it all gives us a sense, okay, it's just a literary text, but the advertisements, I mean, you need a good amount of money to get a printing paper imported from London or Scotland. So I think the material culture behind the production, it also kind of impact the materiality of their preservation also. In which archive the periodical is going to be the preserved? Is it going to be preserved in some kind of the national kind of archive like the British Library, or in India it's the National Library? I mean, if we go out of that, in various reasons, there are minor libraries who are trying to preserve their own locally produced periodicals that may not have a very good number of subscriber or may not be very high literary content, but from that very local region, people also try to create their own kind of public sphere, I will say, with these periodicals, even in a highly colonized society. So they are also there. If you go in and look into how those are preserved currently, like maybe 50 years back or old or 70 years old periodicals, those are actually very hapless situation. One of the reasons is like they use a very, I will say, low quality of paper. They don't have that kind of money, or they could not preserve it properly, or they cannot donate it to a bigger library, or they don't have a connection to some place like British Library or National Library in India. So yeah, those are just lying there. Yeah, if the British Library's EAP program, they take care of it, it's good. Otherwise, it's gone.
Yeah, I think that's sort of my experience as well. And because I was also thinking about materiality and how much like it made me think of access to resources as well, because like thinking about periodicity and which newspapers could afford to be dailies, which could afford to be weeklies, which could afford to only be monthlies. And I have been thinking through the periodicity of these regional magazines that I've been studying, and they're all monthlies, and I think that was mostly because they could only afford to be monthlies, and they pack in so much information into these monthlies, and I think that's a lot to be looking at in one issue. But then it seemed to me like they would have preferred to be weeklies, but they did not have the sort of money to run that regularly. And there were always like petitions, requests for funds, requests for subscribers. Even though they had so many subscribers, they couldn't afford to put their prices up. So I think that's the first issue was always the access to resources that these people had back then. And then the second one, I think, is this feeling of archival loss. It's like when you get to the archive in, say, Mumbai, for instance, and they tell you that, okay, we have the magazine ran from 1889 to 1889 to 1895, but we are missing 6 issues from 1893, or we're missing 2 issues from 1894. And I think this is something that I have grappled with ever since I started working in like unexplored niche archives. And I was reading something interesting. It might be something people already know about, like Anjali Arondekar, who writes about, I think, archival loss. And I'm sort of trying to see how I can take some solace from what she writes about archival loss and archival presence, and how we need not necessarily see these gaps always through the lens of invisibility, because Are we going to these archives to find facts, or are we going there to read facts? And I love that sort of distinction she makes between this desire that we have as archivists to recuperate and to read maybe what is not there, or we go with an expectation and then we find that expectations flattened when, like, sometimes I open these magazines and all these women are so pro-colonial, and I'm like, what are you doing? You're not supposed to glorify Queen Victoria or the Empire, but they all do, and that's the fact of life. So I think I have sort of started using that approach to dealing with loss and these torn papers or damaged issues, and trying to basically read what is there in the archive, if that makes sense. And maybe that's how I'm coping with that. Yeah. Pass on to Sourav.
Thank you, Preet, for the question. I think I love the fact that I cannot access physical copies, because this constantly reminds me of the fact that how badly my movements and access to the archives are still surveilled and ruled by different kinds of paperworks, like the immigration paperworks, so which also defines my research object. Like, I cannot access the archival documents like Nilkantha does. This reminds me of something that James Elkins wrote. So he actually wrote about the radar imaging of fish in a pond, and he says that once you start looking at that radar imaging, that three-dimensional figure, that the fish are actually moving up, down, etc., that gets lost. It's now you're looking at a two-dimensional static image of that, and how do we now start theorizing radar imaging? And that is so fascinating for me, that this enormous romanticization of the page of the print itself, that what Dan Brown tries to do. Yeah, you hold up that page to the sunlight, then you find some kind of watermark written by Galileo, then you invent something, a different kind of conspiracy. I think I miss that a lot, which keeps me moving here, which allows me to theorize that kind of this archival loss. I mean, not loss, but inaccessibility through the physical archive, which I kind of like. But no, regarding the fact of what Preeti asked, like I'm trying to see more literature in periodicals, because I think recently I've become a bit interested in the uncited Shakespeare and Milton in periodicals, because like I'll give you an example. I was working on something, and this is Krishna Dashpal, who was the editor of the Hindu Patriot. He complains to Bertie when Bertie comes to Calcutta, saying that we cannot bear this insolence of office, etc. He goes on that small phrase there of the insolence of office. If you know, it's coming from Hamlet's soliloquy, without any kind of citation. It's like using Shakespeare to pitch forth his own complaint. And I like the fact that they are using the canon in such promiscuous and uncited way, as if these are their own words. And the entire periodical is full of that. Even Gandhi uses Hamlet to talk about the destruction of the railways is a consummation devoted to be wished, and does not cite it. There is no quotation. It's like using literature in periodicals as if like they have come up with these things. So I like those lost citations, those little bitty here, there, citing something from Milton, saying that it is great to serve in what hell than to serve in heaven, something like that. I have become a bit more interested in how that kind of imperial literature got subsumed into periodicals, and how they see their role as also gatekeeper, because Krishna Dashpal would constantly say that in Hindu Patriot, this is a magazine by the aristocrats and the landowners. It's not our headache to complain regarding the bourgeoisie. So if you want to complain, go, you find another paper. I'll help you with that, but we can't do it here, because here we cite Shakespeare and Milton. So yeah, but yeah, I have to be a bit more careful regarding the merger of materiality and literality. I mean, literality within periodicals. But Preeti, does that answer your question? Too many answers we are giving you. I don't know. Okay.
There is one question in the chat, which I think is a great one to end with, and I think I can give each speaker like a minute to answer it, but I'd hate to skip it. So Daniel Roberts asks, no, Kajal was talking about local resources, smaller libraries in India which preserve their periodicals. Sounds fascinating. Could he and the others tell us more about these lesser known resources? Are there any gems worth knowing about? Any attempts to list these nationally? So can anyone elaborate on that for us?
Yeah, I could start. I I actually came across this library in a work that was written in 2005, which was using these magazines as secondary sources. And there were some quotations from these magazines, which I thought, okay, there's a wealth of information in here, but there are only two or three quotations from a magazine that clearly ran for 6 years. And I just ended up at that archive. And it's really refreshing. It's run predominantly by female archivists who were really helpful in helping me access these magazines. And during my latest visit with the current fellowship, I actually found out that they have got lots of money from the state government to digitize some of these magazines. I don't know how they're going to do it because they're in such a state. But it's called the Mumbai Marathi Grantha Sangrahalaya, which roughly translates to Mumbai Marathi Book Archives. And they have lots of other books and pamphlets and periodicals in Marathi. And it's in a western suburb in India, in Mumbai. But yeah, it's lovely. It's a lovely place.
I can talk about, in my mind, from my experience, I can talk about two some such fascinating, I'll say, discoveries of myself. One was regarding the periodical, because I was looking into children's periodical. The other, within the children's periodical, I see the school magazines. So I was going to a library that was outside the main city of my province, Kolkata. So it was in Shantiniketan. Shantiniketan is actually the university that was established by the Nobel laureate Tagore. So the university was initially a school. So the students who used to study there in the 1920s, 1930s, they used to have their own kind of school magazines. One was that was printed, and the others were completely what we can today say wall magazines. So, because Shantiniketan is a central university and they have some kind of funding, so recently they are now got back those wall magazines like 100 years old, and they are now digitizing those wall magazines of a school from 1920s or 1930s. The other interesting part of this preservation of these periodicals and the resources, the other problem was like because the continent was partitioned. So what happened after the partition of this continent? Many of those periodicals, those are actually uh, kept in one truck, and then they were sent across the border. And the partition, everyone knows, like it happens in August. So August is the month of rainy season in India, in the subcontinent. So in between, maybe some of those periodicals or the printed materials, those got destroyed. So I was actually looking outside. In India, you always think of the people who are writing all these things. It is the quote unquote the Hindu middle classes, the people who are coming out of this Hindu families. But I also got some kind of clues key. There are also the Muslims, the Bengali Muslims also, who after partition they majorly went to what is today known as Bangladesh. Whether they are also involved in children's periodical publication. And unfortunately, in this part of the Bengal was partitioned between India and Pakistan, which is now Bangladesh, part of that. So in India, I could not get any one of them, the Muslim children's periodical. When I go to Bangladesh, in very old libraries, I got hold of some of the copies of them. Uh, it's not like the interesting fact was like those are actually not transported to India. Those periodicals actually they got from the private collections of landlords within the present day Bangladesh. The landlords they used to have their own libraries in their own estates. So when the landlord system, the zamindari system was abolished, they sent their all those periodicals to some kind of a state level or provincial level libraries. So that's a there I got a complete new kind of source. The Bengali Muslims, they are also into this business of periodical publication for their own children, and how they are negotiating there with their own question of language, their question of nationality, nationalism, all those things. So it's a completely, I'll say, lesser known resource and lesser known library that lives outside the major centers in British India. Like when we go into periodical studies in British India, we look into either Delhi or Kolkata or Chennai or Bombay. But this is Bombay is not the, Tarini will obviously agree with me. Bombay is not the Bombay presidency. There are other places. In Bengal also, Kolkata is not the Kolkata doesn't equals to Bengal presidency. There are other regions, other places, other suburban towns also. They also have their own, I'll say, resource in those libraries.
Thank you, folks. And I'm sorry, Sourav, we can't hear about any gems you have to offer, but it strikes me that that question suggests something. Maybe there's a list that needs to be compiled for VPR. Thank you to our speakers for 3 fabulous talks, and to everyone for attending today. So I give you applause. Kari has put extensive information in the chat. We have 3 more events coming up in June. Our very next one is on June 5th on art in the periodical press. We hope you'll join us then. And thanks again to our 3 speakers.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, Catherine.
Hey, thank you all. That was